My name is Rajcic, and I'm a researcher based at Monash University in Melbourne, and I'm presenting on behalf of myself and my co-authors our paper towards a diffractive analysis of prompt-based generative AI. So recent developments in text-to-image technology have given rise to discourse surrounding the perceived ethical concerns, economic implications, and consequences for the future of cultural production. Creative professionals are also expressing concern about the threat of AI replacing human illustrators and artists through the outsourcing of creative production. At the same time, we see that as generative imagery becomes pervasive in mainstream society, its development is largely dominated by emerging industry leaders like OpenAI and Stability AI. So with this paper, we argue that a crucial role of academic research is to offer a critical analysis of such near ubiquitous AI models. So rather than attempting to develop or contribute to technological innovation of generative models, we instead push against this kind of technological positivist approach of unbridled making and turn our focus towards the analysis and critique of the technologies that have already pervaded the space of generative AI. So with this research, we employ and build upon a new methodology in HCI called diffractive methodology, which offers a nuanced and exploratory approach to evaluation, focusing not only on similarities, but on the differences across participant experiences. We set out to answer not whether text-to-image systems are good or bad for creativity, rather to unpack the increasingly ambivalent attitudes towards the intrusion of the machine into realms historically reserved for the human. So for this study, we recruited 7 visual artists to collaborate with a personalized diffusion model over a 2-week period. And we selected artists who's primarily work with physical materials in their practice. This was in an effort to gain a different perspective from the digital artists and illustrators who are often featured more prominently in existing studies on these kinds of interfaces. We wanted to investigate how these models can be integrated into their creative practice. So we fine-tuned Stable Diffusion version 1.4 model on a data set of each participant's artwork, such that it would produce images that share the same kind of aesthetic, sensibility, and language as the artist's work. And the participants were given access to their model for about 2 weeks and were asked to incorporate it into their usual workflow. And at the end of the 2 weeks, each participant took part in a semi-structured interview regarding their overall experience working with the AI collaborator. And so in this study, we employed a diffractive methodology as inspired by Karen Barad. So utilizing the metaphor of the photon, Barad proposes that diffraction leads to a mapping of the effects of differences, in contrast with reflection, in which they write, much like the infinite play of images between two facing mirrors, the epistemological gets bounced back and forth. Diffraction as a methodology has been proposed by researchers as a valuable tool. Rather than asking what makes a system work, we should instead ask how a system becomes different things. In our case, this methodology is chosen due to the nuanced and complex nature of the phenomena under inquiry, namely art, creativity, and identity. Of course, every research methodology carries with it a particular lens, which inevitably has a hand in shaping the presented results. For example, a thematic analysis will summarize qualitative data by artificially reducing its complexity and aggregating disparate events together. The object of the diffractive method is to make explicit these methodological influences on the presented results. So in our particular analysis, we begin by coding transcribed interviews, which involves the labeling, grouping, and refining to collate a list of emergent themes. And this is the point of departure from traditional methods. So rather than reporting on themes as kind of coherent or conclusive results, we identify points of difference. We present data that appear on the surface to be in contradiction, and we attempt to reconcile such discrepancies by tracing them back to the greater context of the research assemblage. So one unique feature of the diffractive method is the readiness to sit with such discrepancies. That is, not to discard them simply because they don't fit within a particular presentation structure. And our approach is characterized by allowing the data to evade necessary categorization that would otherwise be imposed by these traditional methodologies. And so in our analysis, we identified 5 themes in total. And for the purpose of this presentation, I'll focus on particular different participant experiences for just a few of the themes, and then discuss our efforts to trace the source of these differences. So with respect to the theme of creative agency, we had Kyle and Georgia come to the same question from opposite sides. That is, on one hand, if the AI system is simply mimicking one's work, then what value does engaging with the model add to one's creative practice? But on the other hand, if the AI system doesn't generate precisely what the participant is imagining, then again, perhaps it's easier not to use the model at all. The perception of machine agency as too dominating or too muted depends upon the particular needs of the user. Georgia expressed interacting with the model initially as a way to gather novel visual ideas, whereas Kyle's primary interest in the model was to see if it could produce convincing variants of his work. The different use cases can be attributed to each participant's professional context in their respective industries. So Kyle is a working artist who initially expressed an interest in finding out whether this kind of automation may increase his productive and hence economic output. Georgia, on the other hand, presented with no direct economic incentive, rather just an interest in how AI could influence or inspire their practice. And so with respect to plagiarism and ethical considerations, Darian argues that one key difference lies in the inability to properly acknowledge and cite human work when pulling inspiration from AI-generated imagery. To flag these models as plagiaristic, however, implicitly assumes that the traditional practices in creative industries are ethically sound. And Zach points out that contemporary art, we often see this outsourcing of the material production to often uncredited or poorly compensated workers. He argues established names profit from the work of lesser known artists and interns, often without credit. And then, as alluded to by Alex, perhaps these text-to-image models allow for the converse to happen. So emerging artists are now granted a new kind of outsourcing power, which has the potential to shrink the gap caused by artists' financial means. In the current debate around plagiarism of the dataset, we have seen a disproportionate representation of voices whose work is public enough to have been scraped and who consequently have a financial stake in the issue. But the participants of this study comprise of young and emerging professional artists who may have little to lose from the development of these models and proportionally more to gain. And on the theme of ideation, Alex found the model to be quite useful as a tool to encourage this divergence of one style. But on the other hand, Andre provides a critique of this prompt interface, saying that the user is still the one that has to input the idea. Generative systems certainly do encourage divergent thinking due to just the quality of the medium, this kind of inherent randomness and unpredictability. But of course, the specific interface design of text-to-image systems means that human input is necessary. And it's not just human input, but rather human guidance from beginning to end. So maybe for the purpose of ideation, the system could actually benefit from a greater degree of agency, a creative system that is able to offer divergence unprompted. And so overall, we identified 2 dominant modes of use for text-to-image systems. And that is AI for ideation and AI for production. So for ideation, what's important is exploiting these unique properties of the medium. So that is the errors, the glitches, and inconsistencies with reality. Those qualities promote divergence in creativity. Secondly, a prioritizing of machine agency. So a handing over more control to the machine to surprise or challenge the user, and placing constraints on the interaction. So moving away from generality and towards specific creative instantiations of interfaces that use and integrate these models. And for production, providing domain-specific customization, so that's For example, a tool designed only for tattoo artists or only for apparel designers that can kind of automate parts of their daily tasks and overall increase their efficiency. And secondly, now a prioritizing of human agency, so giving the user more controllability of the output, things like being able to isolate and change specific parts of a generated image. And finally, this integration with other creativity support tools, like we're seeing with the Adobe Suite and how they've incorporated generative AI. And this is to make their use kind of more accessible to an artist's already existing workflow. And we also gathered a number of insights about the philosophical and ethical implications. We found that participants responded ambivalently. The particular stance one may take on this issue appears to reflect their kind of current positioning within a given creative industry. So what one might have to gain or lose from the increasing ubiquity of this technology. And ambivalence was actually a response that we repeatedly observed. We found that the moments in which the model was perceived as good, so useful output, creatively inspiring, enjoyable to use, came along with it the bad, a perceived threat to one's livelihood, fears around privacy or surveillance, and anxiety around the changing role of the human artist. The better our participants found the model to be, the more inclined they were to express concern or apprehension about its development. And similarly, disappointment with the model's capabilities was reassuring and reaffirming to the participants' role and identity as an artist. And so returning back to Barad here, what often appears as separate entities with sharp edges does not actually entail a relation of absolute exteriority at all. Like the diffraction patterns illuminating the indefinite nature of boundaries, displaying shadows in light regions and bright spots in dark regions, the relation of the social and the scientific is a relation of exteriority within. So with this research, if we set out to answer only the question, is prompt-based generative AI good for creativity, we would miss the multiple and nuanced interpretations and implications that this technology may present for humanity. And I think increasingly so, technology can be classified as neither good nor bad, for it does not set out to achieve a singular or specific goal. Actually, what we're seeing is AI progressively moving towards generality. A diffractive methodology allowed us to identify the good in the bad, the shadows in the light, and ultimately to trace the lines of accountability in the development and application of these models.